Good afternoon and welcome to Pay Entry's weekly webinar. Today we'll be talking about how to manage a partially vaccinated workforce, a challenge for many companies right now. I'm Kathy Graham. I'm head of the HR Services Department at Pay Entry, and I want to welcome you to this session. And let's get right into it. So the things that we're going to talk today about are a little bit about the background of all of this. Is a mandate legal? What's the current climate in the workforce? Dealing with the mixed bag, those who are and are not vaccinated. And then what about incentives for vaccinations? What could you do there? So a little bit about the background. In August the 23rd of this year, the U.S. Food and Drug Administration granted full approval of the Pfizer COVID-19 vaccine, which I think we all know now, for the prevention of COVID-19 disease in people ages 16 and older. And I just heard on the news this morning that Moderna is asking for final approval also on their vaccine. So we'll have another one out there that is a final version or final approved version. Right now, according to the CDC, 52% of the United States population is fully vaccinated. That's a lot, but there's still 48% not. And we see right now that the current rise in the Delta variant, which is one of 4 variants out there, is problematic. The other 3 variants that are out there are only 1% of what's going on, so they're not causing a good deal of activity or stress. But the Delta variant is. And I know if you listen to the news every day, you know that certain states have higher rates of COVID infections than others. So depending on what state you're in, you're probably dealing with a lot of different moving targets. Well, the current climate, employers are already having difficulty hiring new employees, and there's a number of reasons for that. Number one, the unemployment benefits were a lot richer, and people were able to make more on unemployment than they were coming to work, but that is beginning to change because some of the states have dropped that additional revenue or income for those who are on unemployment. There are a lot of people out of work. There's a high unemployment rate, and it's a little bit of a mystery to me why we aren't having the floodgates open and people applying for jobs. But I just ran an ad for an HR person to add to my team, and I only got 10 responses over a 2-week period. So it is very odd what's going on right now, but it's hard to hire people right now. The tide has begun to turn on corporate vaccine mandates. Walt Disney, Facebook, CVS, Delta Airlines, Google, Walmart are introducing these stricter requirements and requiring vaccinations before coming back to work, or putting very strict guidelines on testing if you're not. But Walmart for example, is only enforcing their vaccine mandate at their corporate office location. They're not doing it in the stores where there is a lot more exposure than you would think in an office building, but they have only done so at their office location, and that's probably because it would make it much harder for them to hire staff for the stores. One thing I want to stop and tell you also is that there is a copy of this presentation in the handout section of your screen, and that if you can't download it, just ask me afterwards and I will send it to you. This will also be posted on our website at payentry.com. um, by tomorrow, so you can see it there. If you have any questions during this presentation, please write them in the questions block on your screen, and I will answer all of your questions at the end of this session. Okay, back to the current climate. Recently, I think it was maybe in the last couple of weeks, the president has called on businesses to get involved. And his statement was, today, I'm calling on more companies in the private sector to step up the vaccine requirements that will reach millions more people, because employers have a lot of clout when it comes to having people get the vaccine. But there's a very heated argument and decision or division among people regarding this mandate. And I'm sure you've watched that on the news and hear it at work. So it is something that is very dividing and unfortunate. So, do you have the right as an employer to legally mandate that someone get a vaccination before they work for you? Yes, you do. The EEOC announced earlier this year that it was that employers could require workers that were physically present in the workplace to be vaccinated against COVID-19. So you have the right to do that, and the Justice Department has agreed. So if both of those have said it's fine, then a lawsuit regarding this, unless there are complications from a vaccination or something like that, probably would not are not going to be as rampant as you might have thought they would be. So a lot of companies have virtual employees now, and if they're working at home, you can't mandate that because they're not coming into contact with your other employees. So your company has a right to create a safe work environment for your employees, and do it by having everyone vaccinated or other measures in place. You can create that safe workplace, and that's why EEOC announced this earlier. So if you are going to mandate, be prepared to deal with the consequences. You may lose some key employees because if you say you have to have the vaccine to work here, then and your top salesperson says no, well, you have some options with that. I mean, a key salesperson might not ever have to come into the office, but you may have to terminate that person. And hiring new employees may be more difficult. And remember, only 52% of Americans are vaccinated right now, fully vaccinated. The other thing that you have to deal with if you are going to mandate vaccination is that you have to allow for accommodations. But there are only two accommodations or restrictions here. The first one is the employee's religious beliefs. Under Title VII of the Civil Rights Act, employers with 15 or more employees can't discriminate based on religion. So that's one law that's going to govern this. But the employee does have to demonstrate that they have a sincerely held religious belief. And you can ask for documentation as to why. There are certain religions, I'm not sure, couldn't name any right this minute, but they have adverse opinions about things of this nature. So, but they would have to prove it to you that it is a sincerely held religious belief. The other accommodation would deal with protected medical conditions. If someone has a disability that's recognized by the Americans with Disabilities Act, and that disability would put their health at risk by getting or the vaccine would put them at risk because of their disability, then they could require an accommodation. So it's just someone would have to come forward and say that I have a condition that will not allow me to be vaccinated or puts me at risk if I am vaccinated. But remember, it has to be a disability that's recognized by ADA pregnancy is not a disability recognized by ADA, and I know that that's been a topic of concern lately. But something like diabetes or epilepsy, things of that nature, if the vaccine has been proven to be a problem for that group, then you would have to make an accommodation. Those accommodations that you can come up with are pretty self-explanatory. I think that wearing a mask at work at all times, um, social distancing, working a different shift, or working at home. Undergoing periodic COVID tests. This is one of the more frequent ones. If you're not vaccinated, the companies are asking you to get a COVID test once a week. Sometimes I think in the sports teams, they're getting tested even more frequently than that. So this is pervasive in all of our industries, including sports. Teleworking, which I mentioned, working remotely, or even accepting another job within your organization that does not require them to be around people, if there is something like that, or in a job that would allow them to work at home. Some people have jobs in, for example, a manufacturing facility that would not allow them to work at home because they work in your distribution center or they work in your manufacturing facility. So maybe you have other jobs that they can be trained for where they could accept a virtual assignment. So, and I know most of you will be dealing with a mixed bag, people who are vaccinated and who are not vaccinated. Um, Remember that if you are putting in a mandate, it needs to be job related and consistent with business necessity. For example, you would not, ha- you shouldn't have a vaccination mandate if your entire company is virtual and they never see each other, because that is not consistent with business necessity. But if you have a group that works very closely together, um, in a team or a department in your company, maybe there is the need for that. Under ADA, the employer can have a policy, and I mentioned this earlier, that includes that the individual shall not pose a direct threat to the safety or health of others in the workplace. OSHA has that same ruling. So if you have one person that is going to pose that direct threat, you are going to have to deal with that. So if there's no mandate in place, you've got a bunch of people working together, some vaccinated, some not. Here are a list of things that you can do. Have all employees wear masks at all times, unless they're in an office where they close the door and they, um, are away from other people. Have unvaccinated employees test weekly for COVID. And if you are having them test weekly for COVID right now, it is up in the air as to whether or not you would be responsible as the employer or the employee would be responsible for the cost of that test. I don't think there is a cost right now, but that's a question that's being bounced around. You would need to have everyone observe social distancing and reinforce the hand washings, hand sanitizer use. A lot of these things are the things we did in 2020 when this first happened, and people were still at work. So it's kind of like going backwards into that environment. Avoid opening any common areas like your break rooms in the office. Follow all the CDC guidelines, and many of these are the CDC guidelines. Don't allow any visitors in your office and restrict the travel of unvaccinated employees. You can also have requirements for employees that travel, that are vaccinated, but here it's just we're talking about those who are unvaccinated. You want to restrict the travel. While you bring these people into your building and have them um, work every day under these modified, environment situations, you will want to collect vaccination information for the most part. And you're allowed to do that. It's lawful for you to request that or to confirm it. This information is considered confidential and it's protected under ADA, probably protected under HIPAA also, but ADA has lots of teeth in it. If you do get vaccination information, do not put it in the personnel file and limit access to that data on a need-to-know basis. ADA files, anything that has to do with a disability or this kind of information, even HIPAA information, should always be stored in a separate file. And actually, ADA says stored in a separate file cabinet. So I don't know how important that really is, but do not store it with the personnel files. Similar to your I-9 forms. And what if you want to create some incentives for people to be vaccinated? It would be wonderful if the whole population were vaccinated and you didn't have to deal with this. Because there is such division in the population, in the US population, on vaccination versus no vaccination, there may be employee relations issues that you're also going to have to deal with during this time. Confrontations between people, that's a whole nother subject. And if you need help with that, let me know. But it can end up dividing your workforce as it has divided the United States. So it's sometimes better to be ready for that than to wait until, it happens. When you're making up an incentive for a vaccination, make sure that you're following the federal rules that apply to wellness programs, because there are some limits on what you can provide under a wellness program and some alternatives that you have to give people if they can't qualify for that. So if you have questions about that, let me know. If an incentive is offered for receiving a vaccination through a program that you administer as an employer, or you have an agency come in and administer it on site, the incentive that the individual gets for a vaccination has to be de minimis. That is something like a t-shirt or a water bottle or something with your logo on it. It has to be very minimal, because otherwise it's considered coercive. And that's against the rules for wellness programs and this law. If the employer simply requests some documentation of their vaccination status from the drugstore or the doctor or urgent care place where they got their vaccination, there are no limits that apply to the incentive. So there are some companies out there that have some pretty significant bonus payments, but as little as $50 to $100 will make some people decide to go ahead and get it. Some people don't have anything against getting a vaccine, except they don't like needles, but $100 might make them close their eyes and grit their teeth. So what should an employer do? Well, you need to make a decision. Are you going to mandate or not mandate vaccinations? Once you decide that, you can create a policy and a procedure to support your policy. And then communicate thoroughly with your employees in multiple ways, emails, maybe a video chat. And then again, on top of that, train your managers. If your managers don't know the rules, then it won't work the way that it's supposed to. Managers need to they need to understand things as well as you do in order to support the communication once it rolls out. And this is just a little action plan if you are planning to take a stand on this. Most companies are creating a policy. We are virtual at MPay or Pay Entry, and so we are not mandating the vaccination, but we do collect the data. And because we are concerned about people traveling that have not been vaccinated, so that plays a role in how we allow travel to meet with other employees. Okay, let's see what kind of questions we have here. And remember, just we don't have any questions, and hopefully there's one person that left because they couldn't hear anything, and hopefully that's not the case for everyone. Okay, Erica has a question, and we'll allow some time for this. Remember, HR services, if you are a comprehensive payroll package member of Pay Entry, you have access to the HR services division to answer your questions, um, even without being an HR services um, preferred client. So if you have questions on any of this or other things that are related to HR, all you have to do is email me or call me, and I can help you with that. Okay, here's one question. What kind of documentation do you get for the religious exception? You know, I've never had to do that, but I imagine that a statement from their church on church letterhead that would explain their position on vaccinations. I would say that that would probably be sufficient. Um, okay, the next question, if we have GO 365 and the incentive for points are out there, can we use the vaccination as something to earn points? Definitely. That's a great way to do it. Another question, can the medical exemption and religion exemption be on the same page? I'm not quite sure what you mean be on the same page. If you're talking about your policy, yes, it can. Um, they are two separate exemptions. Most of the time you would only require one, but they could be in the same place in your um, policy, just to tell people how they need to apply for that. Another question, is the employer financially responsible if they mandate vaccine and it causes death or extreme sickness to the employee? That is a thing that is yet to be seen. It has not happened. So I would say talk to your insurance company. There are protections for employers that are out there. That's a very good question, and I'm sure there will be court cases that come up, but as of this time, there have not been any incidents that have come up, and no deaths or extreme sickness to the employee. Because the it's a mandate, but the person does have a choice as to whether to work for you or not. So there's an argument there that it becomes voluntary once they agree to it. That's a question for an attorney, though. And I meant to mention that. That's one thing I'm not. They, you know, I read the same things that you read, and I try to keep up with what's going on. But things do change, and we may have some new news on this next week. Let's see here. For the medical exemption, they need a statement from their doctor, correct? Yes. You would need something from their physician that states that they have a serious medical condition that is recognized by ADA as a disability, something like um, epilepsy, diabetes, some nervous disorders, anything like that that would be considered a protected group in under ADA or a disability would be an exception that you could use, but you would need to get a doctor's note for that, stating the particular condition and the fact that they should not get the vaccination. It's one of those things that you're kind of don't want to get into, because once you know someone has an ADA um, disability and you didn't know it before, you run into the problem of having to maybe at some time accommodate that person. Obviously, this would be the first accommodation, but now that you know that that person has a recognized disability, you are required to ask them if it limits them. Someone wants to know if you can please upload the webinar with this FAQ on your website, and yes, it will be up and ready to go by tomorrow morning. Are there any other questions? And don't forget, you do have a handout available on your screen. If you're not able to download it, let me know. And if after this session is over, you have other questions or questions you don't want to ask on here, you can email me at cgraham@payentry.com. Pretty easy. Okay, well, I think we're out of questions. So remember, you can certainly contact me after this is over, and I'll be happy to help you. Thanks for attending today. Hope the rest of your day goes well. And if you need anything, let me know. I'm here for you.